the second episode of our webinar series, Home and Energy Chats. My name is Heather Chandler, and I am the owner and publisher of the Green and Healthy Maine Homes magazines. We are thrilled to have you with us tonight for what I hope you will find to be a helpful conversation about driving, buying, and owning an electric vehicle in Maine. I would like to start by sharing a special thank you to our sponsors, including our presenting sponsor for this year's Home and Energy Chats, Royal River Heat Pumps. We'll be hearing a little more from them in a moment. I would also like to thank our season sponsor, Bath Savings, a local Maine bank that proudly invests in the people, places, and businesses that make Maine strong. Bath Savings, your neighbor, your bank. And now a brief word from our presenting sponsor, Royal River Heat Pumps.
Hi, I'm Scott Libby, owner of Royal River Heat Pumps. We are proud sponsors of Green Home and Energy Chats in their segment on electric cars. We love electric cars because they're a lot like heat pumps. There's no filling at the pump, no fossil fuels, they're quiet, efficient, they're cool, trendy, and hip. They're the way of the future. They come in different colors. There's great rebates, they can be powered by solar, there's lower ongoing cost, reduced carbon footprint, less maintenance, and they give high quality performance. We also love people that love electric cars and heat pumps. To learn more, contact us at royalriverheatpumps.com or call 400-4065.
So a quick overview of the evening. We will begin the webinar with a presentation from each of our panelists and then open it up to a discussion with Q&A. So please submit any questions you have for our panelists using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we will try our best to get to them all. A reminder that this webinar will be recorded and uploaded to our website, greenmainehomes.com. If you are not familiar with us, Green and Healthy Maine Homes is a multimedia brand dedicated to inspiring healthy, sustainable, energy smart, and future-ready Maine homes through an online business directory, biannual print magazines, monthly email newsletters, and an active social media presence on Facebook and Instagram. We share expert advice to inspire healthy, comfortable, affordable, efficient, and sustainable Maine homes. Please visit our website, greenmainehomes.com, to learn more. And at this point, it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists. Barry Woods is the Director of Electric Vehicle Innovation at Revision Energy. He heads up the exciting work of developing their approach to the rapidly growing area of electric vehicle infrastructure through sales, marketing, and business development. This encompasses everything from equipment for residential electric vehicle chargers to relationships with electric vehicle charging vendors, to helping workplaces develop electric vehicle charging resources for their employees. Barry is also on the board of Plug-in America, the nation's first nonprofit dedicated to promoting public adoption of electric vehicles. He is a frequent writer and speaker on EV-related topics. Welcome, Barry.
Thank you, Heather.
Next, we will hear from Travis Ritchie. Travis grew up in rural South Paris, Maine, where he began researching alternative energies, including solar, electric vehicles, biodiesel, and hydrogen fuel before graduating from high school. He earned his bachelor's degree in space studies from the American Military University, where he focused on ways to produce food in the spacecraft environment. Travis has also worked in the automotive industry for over a decade and has daily driven his electric vehicle for 5 years. He currently teaches science, technology, engineering, and mathematics in Lewiston. Welcome, Travis.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Molly Siegel is a program manager for electric vehicle initiatives at Efficiency Maine. Efficiency Maine is the independent administrator for programs to improve the efficiency of energy use and reduce greenhouse gases in Maine. Efficiency Maine's electric vehicle initiatives launched in 2018 aim to expand the availability of electric vehicle charging infrastructure and the adoption of electric vehicles in Maine. Molly is going to be talking with us about rebates and resources for EVs and chargers. Welcome, Molly. I am so happy to have you all with us tonight for what I expect will be a very informative presentation. As an EV driver myself for the past 6 years, this is a topic very near and dear to me. So I would like to open up our presentations with Barry. Take it away.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Maggie. Pleasure to be on the panel with Travis and Molly. And even though it's only an hour, which isn't that long considering the topic, I think everybody's going to find that there's a lot here that they can learn. And thanks, Heather, for being an advocate for the vehicles. Maggie, you can go to the next slide. As Heather mentioned, I work at Revision Energy, focused entirely on charging station infrastructure. We are in Maine, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire these days, and I think we're closing in on about 300 employee co-owners now, and do a lot of different types of clean energy technology, like solar being probably by far the largest component residentially and commercially, but increasingly battery storage and some of these newer technologies like charging stations for vehicles. So it's a pretty rapidly evolving area. And I thought I'd spend a little bit of time talking about the market, the benefits, and what I see coming in the future as a result of the technology, and then turn it over to Travis to talk more about the vehicles and charging. So you can do the next slide. I think the first thing that is probably good to be aware of is this is a map. This is my worst slide, but it's gives you at least the gist of what I'm hoping to prove here. I mean, I moved back to Maine in 2014, and before I moved here from Oregon, back here from Oregon, there were maybe 3 of these icons illustrating public charging opportunities in the entire state. So this gives you some idea of the growth of the charging infrastructure, public charging infrastructure in the state. I mean, clearly it's focused coastally and metropolitan population centers, but we're definitely well on our way to creating standalone charging infrastructure for travelers and so forth. And I think that's a pretty critical thing. Efficiency Maine yesterday, in fact, celebrated the conclusion of its first phase of DC fast charging, which is what most folks use for traveling longer distances. That was in Wyndham. And so that really kind of marks the beginning, I think, of laying the framework for a much more significant fast charging infrastructure for the state. So you can do the next slide, Maggie. And that's important, because when I think about charging, I think about, vehicles and charging are sort of the flip side of the same coin, because obviously they both are highly interdependent. And I think what we're going to be seeing pretty remarkably is the reduction in the overall cost of the vehicles, and along with that, greater offerings just in terms of the vehicle types. So this is just a slide to illustrate the fact that the battery costs, which in particular I think have driven the costs of the vehicles, are going to be coming down to a level where in the near term, when we go to a dealership, we're going to be asked to compare 2 different technologies, and one of them I would equate to being the cell phone, and the other is a rotary dial phone, and you're going to be asked to make a decision about which of those 2. And I think you'll make the right decision, as you listen to this presentation, because that's how dramatic I think the difference is between electric vehicles and combustion vehicles. Next slide, Maggie. And I think it's important, to think about why electric vehicles are the natural successor for transportation. And they can't be just a little bit better to really be disruptive. They have to be dramatically better. And I think they are, and they are for a variety of reasons, some of which are not necessarily what we normally associate with vehicles, with transportation. I think the first thing is that they're a much better driving experience. They're quiet, they're more powerful, more instant torque. They have a lot more technology on board. They also are cheaper in the long run to operate because of the cost of electricity being much, much lower than gasoline, and because of maintenance costs, which are much different and much lower. Most of the drivers that I know over 5 years, the typical thing that they replace are the tires, and that's it. They don't go in for any grease and oil. These vehicles have 90% fewer moving parts, so there's significant cost savings. And then, of course, I think a really critical element is the reduced greenhouse gas emission as a result of electricity generation. And because most of the electricity generation that can fuel vehicles, we don't have to go to Saudi Arabia to get. We can make electricity here with renewable resources, which means that, from an energy security standpoint and an energy independence standpoint, this technology actually keeps money here, and we can develop the energy generation sources in the form of jobs. So, the integration of renewable energy is another facet I'll talk about in a little bit. We can go to the next slide. And I think this is an interesting slide because it shows you on the emissions standpoint, this is from the Union of Concerned Scientists, and it shows how electricity generation regionally, has some differences in terms of the composition, because you have hydro, you have some gas, you have even still some coal plants. And so depending on where you live in the country, that actually dictates how clean the electric vehicle will be. So, for example, in Hawaii, you'd have to drive you'd have to get 35 miles per gallon to equal, what you get from an electric vehicle, which is, obviously that's a pretty modest amount of mileage to equal the emission, for emissions standpoint, to equal the emissions of an electric vehicle. But if you go to upstate New York, you'd have to drive a combustion engine that gets 191 miles per gallon, to equal the emission efficiency of an electric vehicle. So, and that's because of Niagara Falls. So I think it's important to just kind of keep in mind that electric vehicles get cleaner over time because of the grid getting cleaner over time. Next slide. And platforms, I'm not going to dwell on it, but I mean, we're starting to see a lot more diversity in terms of consumer choices. We hear about pickup trucks, that are there's 5 or 6 manufacturers. Next slide. And we're starting to see buses and other larger scale, medium duty, heavy duty vehicle platforms that are starting to be electrified. And this is important because if we go to the next slide, each of these vehicles really, if in a sense, represents storage capacity for electricity. So I think about, Tesla Powerwalls, which Revision is putting in fairly frequently for residential homes to help back up power in the case of power outages. And I have a car in the garage right now that basically has 6 Tesla Powerwalls in it. And I can tap that at some point, just like I could a fixed battery, to help bring the grid back up in my house if I lose power. That technology is actually emerging, and it's going to become much more cost effective. And it illustrates a component of the vehicles that really is unique to electric vehicles, which is the ability to both, take on electrons from clean energy sources, and also, disengorge them for home use and for other applications. So all these vehicles, have tremendous potential for battery storage, right up to the Lion 8 that has the equivalent of 48 Tesla Powerwalls. So next slide. And that's important because from Revision standpoint, the car becomes sort of an energy anchor for the house, because you can have a solar array that feeds the car, which in turn can then be used to feed the house. And, it's essentially creating a completely, in a sense, off the grid, but certainly clean energy generation type environment for all of your electrical needs. And that's exciting. And it's not just residential like this illustration is, but it's commercial applications. Next slide, Maggie. And part of the reason is that the car actually represents a huge amount of load. If you look at what your typical day-to-day electricity usage is, the car will by far outstrip even the closest competitor, which would be your electric dryer. And it's a daily event. So the car actually uses a lot of electricity, but on the flip side, it can be charged flexibly. So it can be done at night when there's very little demand on the grid. And so it actually enhances the efficiency of the grid using electrons that might otherwise not be put to good use. And that actually saves ratepayers in the long run. Next slide. And the other, I think, critical element of the vehicle is that, cars sit around for most of their life expectancy. We don't drive 24/7. And that's I think the element that charging actually takes the most advantage of, which is having the car charge when it's down at night for long periods or even during the day for workplace. And it can also be used to capture, intermittent renewable energy resources. I think that's another critical element of the car. So is the car transportation or is it energy management? And that's really what I was alluding to earlier. I mean, it really creates a completely different paradigm for what we think of when we think of our vehicle. A utility could pay us to provide them with electricity, or a workplace could pay us to provide them with electricity to avoid demand charges. Next slide. And that's the future of the vehicle, which is vehicle to grid, vehicle to building interactions where the car is a dynamic part of the energy profile of whatever it is that it's connected to. And it's not just consuming, but it's being used for its battery to help balance the grid when the grid is down, or help alleviate, kilowatt per kilowatt hour charges. And that's what's really interesting. So thank you. You can go to the last slide. And if you're curious to have any more information, you have a chance to ask questions, and this is my contact information. Thank you.
Thank you,
All
Barry.
right.
That was a great kickoff. And now we will turn it over to Travis.
Great, thank you, Heather. And just to play off what Barry was talking about last, my electric vehicle is actually a part of my home emergency response plan. So I have a vehicle with a very tiny battery with only 24 kilowatt hours, but that will run my refrigerator for 3 days. So I have an inverter, and it's been tested, and I've done it all. But if I lose power and I expect it to be out for a significant amount of time, the plan is to pull the car out of the garage, plug the refrigerator into my car and use an inverter, and I will be able to run my refrigerator without having my food spoil. So it's using the vehicle as energy management is absolutely a part of having an EV part of your home, really. But so I just wanted to mention that there's a lot of us out there. I think we're about 1% of drivers in Maine right now, something about like that. And every once in a while, when there's not a pandemic, we all like to get together. And here's a picture from a couple of years ago at the Electric Vehicle Expo in South Paris, Maine. I'm one of those cars in there somewhere, but those are all electric vehicles. We like to promote them because we believe in them. And as soon as you drive one, you might as well realize how farther advanced these electric vehicles are from the old-fashioned mechanical pistons and gas guzzling vehicles. And so to talk about EVs some more, I'll talk about the charging. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So people ask, how difficult is it to charge? Where do I charge? Well, at least I'm going to be talking about full EVs, so electric vehicles. There are plug-in hybrids that we could talk about. There are traditional hybrids we could talk about, but I'm going to just talk about full electric vehicles, which is pretty much what the focus is on. And so even with EVs, full electric vehicles, they're very similar to drive as a traditional vehicle. The biggest difference you'll notice is that there's no shift points. So when you're driving, you take off, there's no shifts. It's just a smooth acceleration. The biggest difference is with the fueling. For me, because I own my own home, I don't ever have to worry about fueling. I pull in, I plug it in like a cell phone. And for the last 5 years, I haven't even owned an electric vehicle charger. I just use a 110 outlet and literally plug my car in like a cell phone at the end of my workday. I wake up in the morning with a full battery. And in the wintertime, I am able to use my phone to turn the heater on, and I don't have to worry about opening the door to let out any fumes. I get to go into my garage, get into a nice preheated car, unplug from the grid, full battery, get to work. And so that's the easiest thing to do, is to plug in at home. And you can use a public charging station. I haven't really had to use one unless I go to the beach, take a drive down to Old Orchard, or go to an event in Portland or South Portland. Those are the only times that I really need to use a public charger. Obviously, some people that rent or live in apartment buildings, that can be a different experience. But still, generally speaking, even in that case, it's usually not that difficult, because if you're living in the city that you work in, your commute's usually shorter. You can usually not have to fuel up, even with a small battery, for multiple days at a time. And you just stop in a charging station when you can. Number one, too, is that they're safe to charge. You can charge your car outside. You can charge it inside. They're meant to be driven. They're meant to be charged. And they're very safe to drive. In fact, I'd say many EVs are even safer than a traditional gasoline vehicle. Next slide. So here's just what a couple of cars look like charging. And the top left is a Nissan Leaf. They plug into the front. I prefer that. I like that, actually. It's just, I don't know, it seems convenient for me. Volkswagen had a different idea. They put the charger literally where the gas would go in their gas Golf version. Tesla decided to go with the left rear taillight on their Model S. And then the Chevy Bolt plugs in on the fender. So there's, different folks, different strokes. Well, they all have different approach to it. But that's what cars look like when they're charging. There's just a cord plugged into a wall somewhere that plugs into the car. Next slide. These are what the charging ports look like. The bottom left one is actually mine. And I just like to point out my sticker. I love that thing. So they are just ports. They just where you would pour gasoline. Instead of that, it's just an electrical plug. And on mine, I have two because it's an older style vehicle, but in more modern electric vehicles, there's just a single plug, makes it pretty simple. And that's it. That's what they look like as a charging port. Pretty simple, just a plug. Next slide. And so there are different types of plugs. So on the left, you'll see a slow charger, or what I call a slow charger, but it's the J1772, which is standardized across America. That's pretty much the most ubiquitous charge type that there is. And then, like in a Nissan Leaf, there is the fast charger Chatamo, which is the next looking charger right there. And that is, so I can go up to a fast charger, and we call that level 3. And I can charge my battery to 80% from completely dead, and usually about 30 minutes, maybe 45 minutes in the winter. And then you have the more newer style, which is called CCS. This is what you get on most vehicles now, Volkswagen, Chevy, all that. This is just made simpler. Instead of having two ports, one for slow, one for fast, they just combined them into one. And so that's called the combo charger as well. Those are more common now. And then, of course, Tesla has to outdo them all, and they've got their own version. But even with a Tesla, you can get adapters to plug into the other types to make sure that you can get a charge wherever you need. And then there are also some other adapters that go from Tesla chargers to, say, a J1772, which, there's all kinds of extra gadgets you can buy for an electric vehicle, depending on how far down the rabbit hole you want to go. But next slide. So people always ask, what about the batteries? How long can I expect them to last? Well, traditionally, I haven't really seen a warranty less than 10 years out of a battery. And that's depending on the degradation, because with a lithium ion battery, there will be degradation. However, that is different depending on the type of car, the type of battery, and the type of cooling system in the battery. So, my old-fashioned Nissan Leaf is only air-cooled, and so therefore the battery is known to degrade faster. However, up here in Maine, where we have a pretty temperate climate, I really haven't seen any battery degradation in the 5 years that I've been driving it. If I lived in Arizona, I might have a different situation. However, if you have a Tesla or a Chevy Bolt, they're liquid cooled. They don't really have that issue anymore. It's kind of the new technology. And so you could have a battery that lasts well past 10 years. They are all wrapped in a protective metal casing, like a clamshell, just like a gas tank. A gas tank is usually two clamshell metal formed pieces stuck together. That's your tank. Well, same thing with a battery case. It's usually these two metal cases wrapped around a battery. If you have a Tesla, then you even have a titanium shield underneath. Next slide. So how fast can we charge? Well, if you are like me and you plug in on a 110 outlet, well, it might take all night, and that's fine by me. I usually just plug in after work, wake up in the morning, and it's all plugged, all charged. If I go to a level 2 charger, which is about the same power as a dryer outlet, I could get, you know, a lot faster charge. I can get 10 to 25 miles of charge per hour. But if I stop at a fast charger, which are becoming more popular, I could get up to 60 to 90 miles of charge per half hour. And so there's a big difference between chargers, and you know, you can look in your area to find the right one for you. Next slide. So how much does it cost to charge? Well, the rough cost of electricity is 16 cents here in Maine. And so my Leaf, it cost me $3.84 to drive around 80 to 84 miles. If you had a brand new Tesla, you would fill up your battery with $16 and be able to drive over 300 miles. And so comparatively, it is less expensive than a gas vehicle. Next slide. I just like to show this slide because yes, you can charge in bad weather. And if you look closely at the left fender, you'll see the charge port door open and the plug in there. So up here in Maine, yes, you can charge in the wintertime. So I just want to throw that one in there. Next slide. I kind of copied Barry here, but I did want to include this slide of the chargers around. Now you will see many more chargers up in Canada. They're a little bit more forward thinking as of right now, but we are catching up. Obviously, Northern Maine has some extra work to do, but we are still catching up here in Maine, doing pretty good. We could always use more, but thanks to Barry and others, we're making good progress here. Next slide. And I just wanted to reiterate what Barry said, that when you charge your electric vehicle, you are charging it using 99% of the time American electrons that were made right here in America. Unless, of course, this Canadian power thing goes through, then that might shake things up a little bit. But even then, we're still keeping it as local as possible. Next slide. And so there are over 13 fully battery electric vehicle models in the United States. All the major players are going electric. They offer models and they're getting cheaper all the time. You can go anywhere from the cheapest Nissan Leaf all the way up to the most expensive Tesla. And there's many choices in between. There are some with 4-wheel drive, usually Teslas. There are some that get very little range, but they are very compact and economic. And then you can get some really comfortable luxury cars as well, that are electric. And then next slide. And actually, next slide, I'll skip over this one just to save some time. I just wanted to mention real quick that there is a used vehicle market here in Maine. All the major websites now cater to electric vehicles. You can go to CarMax, you can go to Edmunds, you can go and look up specifically electric vehicles. And so, and I did have to mention that one of my previous employers, Paris Autobarn, has a fantastic selection of used electric vehicles. And if they don't have what you need on site, they can find it for you. And no, I was not paid to say that. But next slide. Here's a picture of Paris Autobarn, just this little rural place out in Maine, a little 2-bay garage as of right now. And they've got this giant selection of electric vehicles. And that's, I haven't even touched upon the next slide. Go ahead to the next slide. Along with just regular vehicles, there's motorcycles, snowmobiles, ATVs, construction equipment, and there's even traditional hybrids we haven't talked about. The future is electric, and you got to hop in and go for the ride. And that's my part. So I'll hand it off over to Molly.
All right. Thanks so much, Travis, and thanks, Heather and Maggie, for having us here tonight. I'm really excited to be talking with you guys about Efficiency Maine's electric vehicle programs. And I think with those two presentations, it'll be a good time now to talk about some of the incentives and resources that are available from Efficiency Maine to help you make the transition to electric vehicles. Next slide, please. So a quick introduction about Efficiency Maine. We are an independent quasi-state agency. We have a board that's appointed by the governor and confirmed by the legislature. As Heather mentioned, we run the state's energy efficiency and carbon saving programs, including providing rebates, financing, technical information, and a registry of vendors for energy efficiency projects. We are funded by you, the ratepayers of electricity and natural gas, as well as the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative known as Ritchie, ISO New England, grants and other sources. Notably, the electric vehicle programs are primarily funded by the Volkswagen settlement for violating Maine's environmental protection laws. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to provide a little bit of background from Maine's Climate Action Plan, which you might know came out in December of last year and focuses heavily on transportation. Transportation accounts for 54% of carbon emissions in the state of Maine, so it's a significant chunk of our emissions. And the plan has a goal of achieving emissions reductions by putting 219,000 light-duty EVs on the road in Maine by 2030. That's a pretty ambitious goal. It's estimated that there are around 3,000 to 4,000 EVs on the roads in Maine right now, so we have a long way to go. Next slide, please. And you can go to the next slide. So this is a little bit of an echo of what Travis touched on, so I'll just go quickly. Wanted to go over the different types of chargers. So level 1, level 2, level 3, he already talked about all this, so I won't dwell on it, but this will be important information when we're talking about our electric vehicle programs. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, Efficiency Maine has a goal of expanding Maine's public charging network. To date, we have funded 14 DC fast charge plugs at 7 different locations. And as Barry mentioned, we just completed round 1, phase 1 of that network, finishing up with the Wyndham charger at Hannaford. So that's pretty exciting. We've also funded 136 level 2 plugs statewide at 47 different site locations. Those are mostly municipal and state, as well as retail, workplace, and multi-unit dwellings. And today there are over 500 public charging plugs in Maine. That does include Tesla, so it's kind of a mix of Tesla and the other more openly available stations. And just a couple of our future plans. We just closed an RFP for DC fast charging stations in the Bangor area, as well as coastal and central Maine. And we anticipate making awards in the next few weeks. So that will add probably another 8 to 10 fast charge plugs in the coming years. We also have a level 2 charging RFP out right now for Washington and Aroostook County, as well as Western Maine, west of I-95. So that will help to get at some of the more sparsely populated and lesser served areas. And we also hope to add about 60 new DC fast charging plugs and up to 500 new level 2 plugs in the coming years, depending on funding. So that is our efforts at building out Maine's charging network so far. And you can skip the next slide and then the next slide. So go ahead 2 slides. Great. Oh wait, go back 1 slide. Thanks. So what you're waiting to hear about, these are the rebates that are available from Efficiency Maine for electric vehicles. Many of you probably know about Efficiency Maine's other rebate programs for heat pumps, water heaters, and insulation and weatherization, as well as some other energy saving measures. One of our newer programs is electric vehicles. So we offer a standard rebate of $2,000 for a new battery electric vehicle, or $1,000 for a plug-in hybrid. Those are for individuals, businesses, and nonprofits. You can get a rebate when you purchase a vehicle at any one of our 60 plus participating dealers statewide. So those are most of the major dealers in the state, as well as a lot of smaller dealers that are now taking part in our program. Also, if you purchase a Tesla directly from the manufacturer, you can get a mail-in rebate. So there's 2 ways to get a rebate. We do have a price cap of $50,000, and it must be on our list of eligible vehicles, which includes all of the available EVs under that price cap. And for plug-in hybrids, they have to have at least 20 miles of electric range. We also offer enhanced rebates to certain customers, such as low-income Maine residents, governmental entities and tribal governments, and select nonprofits that serve vulnerable populations. And those folks have to get a pre-approval letter from us before getting an enhanced rebate. Next slide, please. Just wanted to touch on some of the available vehicles. If you go to our website, efficiencymaine.com/EV, you can view the entire list. I believe we have 24 eligible vehicles right now, 11 BEVs and 13 plug-in hybrids. And if you go to this list on our website, you can see the miles per gallon, you can see the electric range of all the different vehicles, the MSRP, and then how much it will be after subtracting Efficiency Maine's rebate, as well as the maximum federal tax credit. So if you're interested, I would really recommend heading over to our website to check out this list, and it'll give you a better idea of what's available. There is really a pretty good variety. Next slide, please. And it's been a popular program. We've issued 1,081 EV rebates. That was as of the end of March. We've done more since then, but it's pretty evenly split between battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids, and 220 different zip codes. On the left, you can see the map. That's where our rebates have been issued. They are concentrated more in the population centers, but we do feel like there's pretty good geographic distribution. And as we get more dealers signing up in more remote areas, as well as building out the charging network, the map is filling in a little bit. So that's pretty exciting. Next slide, please. In addition to providing incentives, we also work to increase awareness about EV technology and the fact that, yes, EVs do work in Maine, and there are people out there driving them, and they're perfectly suitable for most folks' daily driving needs. So we have a website with resources about electric vehicles and charging. I would say that's a great place to go if you have questions that are not answered tonight. Go to our website, and we have an FAQ page, as well as information about selecting a vehicle, installing a charger. We also are working to get more customers driving EVs. The best way to encourage people to try out an electric vehicle is to actually try driving it. So once it becomes safe to do so again, we're hoping to host more test drive events where folks can really get behind the wheel and see what it feels like to drive an EV. We have a PSA campaign via radio and digital ads. So if you listen to the radio, you might hear us on the airwaves, just a fun way to get the message out. And soon we'll be releasing a series of how-to guidebooks and short videos on best practices for charging and installing home and public chargers. And that will be another fun way to get the message out. Next slide, please. This is just a snapshot of what you can find on our website. Information about chargers. We have a map of the public charging stations in Maine. Great, so you can go to the next slide. If you have more questions that you'd like to ask about our programs or about electric vehicles in general, head to our website. You can call us or you can email us info@efficiencymaine.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Molly, and thank you also, Travis. Sorry. Why don't we start with a question from Julia Bassett, and that is, which cars still qualify for the tax credits? Will there be new ones, for example, to trade in an old car? So who would like to field that one?
The only two manufacturers right now that have been excluded from federal tax credits are Tesla and GM, but I think the wild card right now is the new infrastructure proposal before the federal legislature, where they're thinking of re-upping federal tax credits for all manufacturers and even at higher caps. So
I'm also going to put a link in the chat to a website that does list the status of all of the various manufacturers and their credits. So that'll be some helpful information. Okay, so moving on to the next one. Guy is asking, given that electric cars do not pay a gas tax for our road maintenance, what ways do you support for EV users to contribute?
I can take that one.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, and so gas tax and road tax actually is, obviously a very important thing. I can anyone who drives on the roads around knows that more could be done for the road. And so I think it's a very important situation for us to consider as, you know, a state in general. As far as electric vehicles, no, they don't pay a gas tax. They do pay taxes on the electricity that they put into their vehicles. But also a situation comes up where, so some states are implementing a fee at registration for to kind of try to make up for no fuel taxes being accumulated from fueling. But the problem is that these are usually punitive in nature and usually far overshadow the amount of taxes that one would pay at the pump with a vehicle. And so a couple of years ago, there was an attempt, in Maine to add a $200 to $250 fee at registration for electric vehicle owners, and it was even hybrid owners back then too. So I did the math and contacted the legislator who sponsored the bill, and I just said that the math doesn't make sense because I have a Nissan Leaf, which is the same thing as a Nissan Versa, same chassis, same size, and if I had a Nissan Versa and drove it approximately 13,000 miles a year, I would have spent between $40 to $45 in gas tax. And so that does not equal the $200 fee that I would have had to pay as an electric vehicle owner at registration. And so, whatever we can come up with, it's got to be equitable. And I honestly don't think that a gas tax is the answer. When it comes down to road repairs, what causes damage? Well, it's miles driven and weight. And weight is, you don't double the weight of a vehicle and get double the damage. You double the weight of a vehicle, you quadruple the damage to the road. And so therefore, my personal opinion is that we need to revise road tax, gas tax, and road repair funding as a whole. And I don't think that, picking on EV owners who are 1% of the population specifically and trying to make up for lost funds that way is an appropriate response. But that is a very important thing to consider going forward.
Thank you. David is asking, what are you projecting on availability and price over the next few years? What are we hearing?
I think the next few years is actually going to be a bonanza for consumer choice. I think you're looking at, if you listen almost every week, there's a new manufacturer who's announcing that they're going to start, some type of plug-in version or stop making combustion engines. So I think the costs, I think, as I illustrated in one of the slides about the battery, technology, it means that the car prices are going to come down to a level that's very competitive with what we're driving, with combustion. So I don't know. There is a number. I think it's over 100 plug-in vehicles over the next 2 to 3 years. And Volkswagen is going to become a huge player. Ford, we're getting a lot of buzz. I personally am going to be really excited about to see what happens in the pickup market, because the Ford F-150 is the single largest selling light duty passenger vehicle in the country. So if we can actually make inroads into that particular platform, whether it's rural or urban or suburban, it's a popular vehicle. So I think there's some really good things on the horizon.
We have a question from Emma Clayton. I believe that this was answered in part, but I'm going to ask it because I think there's a little bit more information we can share. She says that EVs at first glance seem so expensive. Do you have any suggestions, incentives, etc., different perspectives for folks on a tight budget? Molly, can you say a little bit about the used EV rebate that Efficiency Maine recently launched?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have a rebate on used EVs for low-income customers, and that was launched recently at the end of 2020. So qualified low-income customers who are on the list to receive heating assistance can receive a rebate of $2,500 on a used BEV or plug-in hybrid. So it works for both types of vehicles. And they do have to be receiving fuel assistance in order to qualify for that. It's a simple pre-approval application through our website. And so you submit that to us, we email you a pre-approval letter, and then you bring that to the dealer and they will give you an instant rebate in that amount. And we do also have an enhanced rebate on new vehicles for qualified low-income customers. It goes up to $5,500 for a new vehicle, for a new battery electric vehicle. So obviously those are a lot pricier, but for some customers who really need a high mileage vehicle, it could be the right choice. It's also worth mentioning that leasing can be right for some people, and there are some affordable leasing deals out there. So it's good to check with your dealer on that for sure. But definitely used EVs are a good place to look to start. And as Travis mentioned, there is a market for those in Maine.
If I could add 2 quick points. One is, I think the other element here that is easy to lose track of is the savings over time based on operational and maintenance costs. And it's not something we typically think of when we're buying the car and looking at the sticker. But over time, that car's sticker price is actually not as relevant, in terms of the overall cost of the vehicle. And when you look at an EV, I've seen some numbers that range from $3,000 to $5,000 of additional savings over the life of the vehicle. So do you take that into consideration when you're looking at and comparing costs? I think you should. And then the only other thing I'd say that's interesting to me, off of what Molly said about leases, I don't typically lease vehicles, but sometimes there are some unbelievable lease deals. And if you figure that you can save 50 to 100, depending on your usage of the vehicle and your commute, if you can save 50 to 100 bucks a month in gas, which is reasonable depending on your driving habits, and take that off of some of these leases, I have literally heard of leases that cost you like 50 bucks a month or less, depending on the deal. And it's hard to predict, but like the Hyundai Ioniq had a really good deal like a year ago, and I think we had 3 people at revision take up the lease on that vehicle because the deal was so good.
Yeah, a friend of mine recently picked up a lease for $129 a month, and he did the math and realized that what he was going to be saving in gas, despite the bump in electricity, it was a wash, and it was just going to be a much more convenient vehicle for him to drive. So definitely some good lease deals out there. Okay, next one, Barry, I think you answered this in the Q&A, but I'm going to ask so that everybody can hear the answer. How does Maine's public charging network per capita compare to other New England states such as Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Vermont?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't think I've ever seen a per capita metric, but I think, if you think about part of what Travis said, I mean, first of all, the dirty secret about electric vehicles is that, when you buy one, 80 to 90% of the time you're charging at home. You're never using the public infrastructure. So that's something to be aware of. I'd say Maine recently did achieve ninth in the ninth best state in the country for EV policies and sort of progressive driver infrastructure investment, et cetera. That was from Plug in America. So Maine's come a long way in the last couple of years under a different administration, and there's no sign of it slowing down. But I think, the other variable in Maine is that we get a huge influx of tourists, in the summer, so the per capita, is a tough one, but I think we're doing really well. And I think we have some very aggressive programs with Efficiency Maine that is going to be using, non-taxpayer money with VW settlement and potentially the Hydro-Quebec mediated settlement. So we've come a long way, and I think we're going to be doing some tremendous work in the near future to really get Maine competitive.
June is asking if it takes longer to charge an EV than to put gas in gas-powered cars, will charging stations have to be much larger than our current gas stations in terms of number of chargers to deal with the greater number of cars that will accumulate in the charging process?
I'd say a good model to follow is Tesla. They usually don't put any less than like 6 or 8 charging spots every station that they install. But just to reiterate, most people, the vast majority, will never need to use a public charger. And so yes, I would love to see multiple spots. What I would love to see is at every gas station having a couple of chargers. And there are some gas stations that are already thinking about that, switching their models. There's a bunch of different ways that we could create enough infrastructure for cars. But ultimately, yes, we'll have to increase, more charging stations for sure, just for the tourists. For sometimes you find out that, oh, I am running a little low on charge. Why don't I just go pick up a little bit so I can use the heater more often in my car? Just us old EV drivers with the low mileage EVs, we come up with all these different methods and tactics to get around. And so answer is yes, would have to increase infrastructure, but we have to remember that the majority of people won't ever need to use a charger. My wife has never visited a public charger with her electric vehicle. She's just never needed to. And so it's just one of those things that you got to take that into consideration as well.
I just add just real quick, June, I think it's a really good question because I think it illustrates a bit of a misnomer, which Travis alluded to, which is, it's not the same as gas. And we have this concept of what it takes to fuel vehicles based on gas. And what we're really talking about is a very different model. I mean, it's the difference between sipping and gulping. And when I think about a car, I think about an EV, I think about it sips electricity here and there, maybe overnight. And I actually think I think there's truth to the fact that people tend to overestimate how much they drive on a daily basis. So day to day, I may only need to recover 20 to 30 miles, which translates into an hour, maybe 2 hours of charging on a level 2 home-based charger. It's very different than like waiting for the gas tank to get empty and then going into the gas station. It's more like your cell phone, when it goes down and you're near a plug, you plug it in. And that's, again, I think that's a huge advantage because electricity is everywhere. Instead of a gas station now, for a fueling metaphor, anybody with electricity is a gas station. Walmart's, Hannaford, they're no longer are Mobile and Citgo competing with one another. They're competing with everybody that has a wire going to their building. So it's going to be, and that's obviously a good thing in terms of, access.
I think the best answer I ever heard to the question of how long does it take to charge an electric vehicle was Andy Meyer at Efficiency Maine. And he said 10 seconds. Takes 5 seconds to get out of your car and plug it in, and 5 seconds in the morning to get back in and unplug it. Yeah. So it's just a totally different way of thinking about powering your car. Richard has a question. Any progress in extending battery life? What are we expecting?
The 300 miles is the magic number. And most gas vehicles, that's the magic number for them. And most electric vehicle manufacturers are trying to get to that number. Tesla's already there. And so, yes, they're going to, and there's, other competitors coming out saying that, there's this new electric trucks coming out with a 550-mile range. So yes, they're going to stuff as much power and as much capacity into vehicles that consumers want. And so if there's a market, they're going for it. And right now the magic number is 300 miles, which most manufacturers, this year are very close to that number if they don't hit it.
Yeah, I think for me, it's like, how long does it take for my butt to get sore? That's the right amount of range. 300 miles, I don't need any more miles than 300 miles before I take a break. And from a cost standpoint, I think 300 is actually a really good number. We used to, I remember there was a fair amount of gambling over what the magic number was going to be. And for some period of time, it was 150, and then it's 200. But I think 300 actually is a pretty fair number just based on average patience level and how quickly these cars can charge and get back. You can take a break and get the battery basically back up to 80% after a 300 mile within a half hour to 40 minutes, which is, it's a little bit longer than gas, but it's a good stretch. So we're close.
Okay, another one from Guy. He is asking, an apparent shortcoming of EVs is emergency response and handling battery fires. What is the industry doing for first responders?
Primarily what the industry is doing for first responders is training and providing data. Every electric vehicle has a battery cutoff. Most first responders, fire personnel, are trained with vehicle fires. What they do, they pop the hood. In a traditional car, they make sure the key's off, they pop the hood, they snip the battery cable. You know, they do these things to protect themselves. With electric vehicles, it's different. If there's a fire in a vehicle, a battery electric vehicle, water is the best. It takes a lot of water to keep it cool, but in comparison, you know, you can use a traditional ABC fire extinguisher. So a lithium-ion battery fire is considered a B-rated fire, which almost any fire extinguisher can put that out. So, you know, if you puncture your cell phone on accident, you know, that could start a fire. So it's the same exact battery that's in here, you know, that's in the car. And so, you know, depending on the situation, depending on the size of the battery, depends on the response. If you've got a small 24 kilowatt hour battery in the car, and the car catches fire, the good news is the cars don't explode in the same manner that a gasoline engine car does. And gasoline fires are far more ubiquitous than an electric vehicle fire. But even if that situation happens, water is the best thing to do, because with a battery fire, it's about cooling off the cells to prevent thermal runaway. It's just, you need a lot of water sometimes. So, you know, for Maine, that's not a problem. For Maine, we've got water. We've got lots of water. Obviously, different regions require different response rates, but you can use halon fire extinguishers, traditional B-rated fire extinguishers, but most often you use water, lots of it, and training. And so that's the other mention.
Great, thank you. And unfortunately, we have come to the end of our hour and we did not get to all of the questions. So if you do have questions we didn't get to today, we will include contact information for our panelists in a follow-up email, along with a link to the recording. I would like to once again thank you for joining us for Home and Energy Chats. I hope you learned some helpful new information. I would like to thank our sponsors, Royal River Heat Pumps, our presenting sponsor, and Fast Savings. I would like to thank Maggie Perkins, who has been managing everything so beautifully behind the scenes. And thank you to our panelists for sharing your expertise with us this evening. We have a special thank you gift that we'll be mailing to each of you, a treat from our favorite local chocolatier, Dean Sweets, and a complimentary subscription or gift subscription to Green and Healthy Maine. So please mark your calendars for the next episode of the Home and Energy Chats. We're going to be focusing on women in the green building industry here in Maine on May 18th at 6 p.m. You will find all of the details, including the full calendar of events, on our website. And lastly, you will see a brief survey pop up when we close the webinar. We'd love to hear your feedback on today's session to help us craft future programming that meets your needs. So thanks again to everyone who joined us, and thank you to our sponsors. And I hope you get out and enjoy some of that beautiful evening tonight.
Thank you.